Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. I had a really interesting chat during the coffee break and also was able to attend really interesting talk. So my talk will be on how you can use cache to attack both integrity and confidentiality of secure system. But let's first me introduce a little bit my research and a little bit of motivation, right? So there are several scenarios here. So we have smartphones that have been compromised lately. For example, there's been an issue in a device driver of Qualcomm that allow an attacker to compromise remotely an Android phone. We get ATM that have been compromised by attackers. That's obviously an immediate financial loss, right? If the ATM start to deliver money for free. We get remote attack to automotive system, and that's obviously a safety issue if an attacker is able to control our braking system or the steering wheel. And yesterday we had a really interesting talk on pacemaker, and some attacks have been demonstrated in lab in pacemaker. So this is just a screenshot from a TV show in US, Homeland, where an attacker is able to kill a high-profile US official by compromising his pacemaker. I mean, the last one is fiction, but the other cases are real. And the same stuff can happen in industrial control system, right? So what all these systems have in common? They are really complex. They provide a lot of functionalities. And these functionalities have basically mixed criticality. So I have on my smartphone my bank ID that allows me to sign a financial transaction with my bank. At the same time, I have Candy Crush and, I don't know, Pokemon. And on the pacemaker yesterday, we saw that there is some really critical software running there, the one that controls basically the pacemaker. And we have some less critical part of the system that is the networking infrastructure. And in that case, there was even two different networking stacks with two different levels of criticality. So anyone probably will suggest, OK, just split this component. All of this component, this different software running at different level of criticality to be isolated from each other. So that if there is a failure in one of these complex systems, then this cannot affect the other one. Also because in all these cases, basically, the attacker didn't compromise really directly the high critical part of the software, but he basically used bugs in the less critical part of the system. So that's basically motivate my research. So I come from the formal method works, so I basically do math. And in the last 4 years, I applied math in a formally verified software. And the idea is that if we are able to isolate soundly different components here, then we can possibly provide some more secure system. And there are several cases where formal verification had huge success. I think the most famous one is SCL4. It's a microkernel that has been developed in Australia by NICTA, and they formally verified correctness of the microkernel down to the assembly code, to the binary code. So they even don't trust the compiler, GCC. They say GCC is too big, possibly there is some failure in GCC. So basically, this system provides unprecedented security properties. And the deal here, the goal, is to provide hacker-proof code. I mean, this is a bold statement. I will elaborate on this. But the idea is that we have a formal proof, mathematical proof, that show that these systems are secure. And I'm involved in two projects that have this kind of goal. One is Prosper, the other one is ASPOC. They basically focus on formally verifying hypervisor for embedded system, basically smartphone. So what I mean for hacker-proof code? So we basically define formal model, mathematical models of the system. These are basically mathematical equations. And then we implement proof. We provide proof that the system is secure. And it's important that these models are sound, right? Because if the model is wrong, we are basically proving something that has no meaning. And in some cases, I mean, these models are abstraction. We cannot really model everything. These are digital models of the system. So for example, we take an architectural specification like ARM. We define all the possible variables of this system, like registers, flags, memory, etc. And then we model how this system behaves. But a lot of variables are not included in the formal verification. For example, cache. I think today we don't have any system that has been formally verified taking into account the behavior of cache. How much of this is a problem? So we know that cache, for example, affects the execution time of software. And by monitoring the execution time of a software, an attacker can be able to extract information from cryptographic algorithm. Similarly, power consumption and temperature analysis can be used to extract information from crypto services. So, but at least the models that we use for formal verification should be sound, respect the variables that we include in the formal verification. So if we have a model and we say, OK, we've only model registers, memory, flags, at least the model should be able to predict the behavior of these components, right? And if this is the case, then we can just take the additional variable, for example, time, and counter-attack that use this variable using some model external means. For example, whenever the attacker tries to query the current system time, the operating system can introduce some noise there. Or if the operating system discovers that a user process requires the times every 2 milliseconds, it can raise an alert, say, something phishing is happening here. Why this process is always asking the time? It's so late. So let's go a little bit more in detail, right? So this is the standard verification approach. We start by, we take the specification of a system, we model this system mathematically, so we define all the variables that we know in the system. In this case, we have only 2 variables, x and y. And then this can be registers and memory, for example, of a CPU. And then we formally model the behavior. Let's say whenever we have a system that has the variable x and y, if we execute an instruction, we obtain a new state where the variables are x and z. And then if we execute another instruction, we go in a new state where the variables are w and z. Then this gives us basically an abstract model. This is a mathematical formulation of the system. And then we prove some properties of this system. For example, the property p, in this case, holds whatever happens in the system. This is like an invariant that will be preserved by all possible execution. And these properties can be, I don't know, it can never happen that an executable code that is in the system has a signature that is not valid. So only signed code can be executed in the system. That cannot be a malware. So when we go in a real system, so the hardware, right? We have probably some additional variables. We have cache, we have execution time, we have power consumption, etc. Here, I use the variable T1 to just represent this additional variable. So what we would like is that, at least for the variables that we used here, these variables behave the same here and here. If this is the case, that's obviously that this property P, if hold here, also here. We can say that we verified something in the abstract world, in the mathematical world, and this holds also in the real world. But sometimes this does not happen. Think, for example, to row hammer. So there is some additional variable here that can affect another variable here, a variable that we use for the formal verification. If this happens, that's really bad, because it means that what we proved here cannot be transferred here. Okay? So we proved something here, but in the real system, this system behaves completely different. Then this makes basically formal verification pointless. Okay? So it's important to preserve this refinement. And this gives us basically the standard verification cycle. We start from some assumption. From this assumption, we build models. And on top of this model, we verify a system. And what can happen is that we found that the system is secure, and we try to refine this assumption. Let's try to remove some of this. Or let's try to add some variables, for example, cache or execution time. We go back, we refine the model, again, we verify the system, and either this is correct, or we can find a vulnerability. And if we generalize this vulnerability, sometimes we can find a new class of attack. And that's basically what I will present now. That's the real content of the talk, okay? What we found are new storage channels, so a new vector that has never been used before to attack both confidentiality of integrity of secure system using cache. So a little bit of background on how cache works. So the idea is that cache should be transparent. When I develop an application, I should not care about the existence of cache, right? But actually, this is not really always the case. That's an obvious scenario. So if I have a memory-mapped serial port, when I write on the register, memory mapped register of the serial port, I expect this value to be printed on, I don't know, a display. But if the memory mapped register are cached, this does not happen anymore, right? I write something in the serial port, but this is cached, this is not printed outside. So sometimes the cache are not really transparent. And exactly for this reason, basically to manage device, what you can usually configure the part of the memory that is cacheable and the part of the memory that is not cacheable. How this is done? Usually by configuring the page table, the memory management unit. So we have a software here. The software uses virtual address. It sends this virtual address to the page, to the memory management unit. The memory management unit fetch from the page table the configuration and say, OK, this address is cacheable because the configuration says that this is standard memory, or this address is not cacheable because the configuration says that this is device memory. But this configuration is done using virtual memory. So what you can have now is two different virtual alias, two different virtual addresses that point to the same memory location. One is cacheable and the other one no. This is called mismeasured cacheability attribute. And if you read the specification of Intel, ARM, Power, etc., they say, don't do this. Don't mix cacheability attribute. But actually, sometimes the attacker is powerful enough that is able to break this assumption. So what happens is that you can have incoherent cache behavior. And that's what ARM states. So if you have an mismatched cacheability attribute, you can have unexpected cache hit. What does it mean is that the CPU can completely disregard what there is in the cache and can go directly to the memory, bypassing the cache if the virtual alias is set as non-cacheable. So when this is possible, when an attacker is powerful enough to break this assumption? Several cases. So we can have an operating system that has been compromised, for example, Android, that is running on top of an hypervisor and is trying to attack another operating system of the hypervisor itself. Android obviously is able to set up cacheability of its own memory. Or we can have an operating system that has been, again, compromised, that is trying to attack some secure service that has been deployed in some specialized security ring of the CPU, like ARM Trust Zone, that is supposed to be completely isolated by the operating system. That's the main reason why they developed Trust Zone. Or you can have a device driver that has been compromised, let's say the device driver of Qualcomm, then trying to attack a microkernel. So in all these cases, the attacker is powerful enough to set up the cacheability attribute of its own virtual memory. So how we can ensure that the attacker does not rise this incoherent cache behavior? So and finally, you can arrive to the attack. Okay? Here we have an attacker and we have a victim. These two software are executed on the same system, but they're executed with two different privileged domains. And the victim basically behaves like a security monitor. It reads a request. We assume that this request is stored in, okay, it's not really visible, but we assume that this request is stored in the physical address PA. So the victim will receive a request from the attacker. It checks a security policy here. If this security policy is not satisfied, the request is rejected. Otherwise, this is accepted. For example, let's imagine that the victim is an operating system that wants to execute an application, and the victim is a security monitor that checks if all applications that are executed are signed. So the attacker prepares the application in memory and then asks the victim to make this part of the memory executable. The victim checks the signature and then makes the page table, this memory region executable. Now, initially, both the attacker and the victim share this part of memory. The attacker uses non-cacheable alias, and the victim uses cacheable one. The attacker will remove this mapping and will delegate the victim to use this memory area as input of the secure function. So let's see how this works. So the attacker writes 0 using its own non-cacheable alias. This is not cacheable, so we have an expected cache hit. The attacker writes 0 directly into the memory, bypassing the cache completely. For some reason, the victim is scheduled. The victim reads this memory location using a cacheable alias. It tries to access the cache. There is nothing there. So this is fetched from the memory, is copied into the cache. Obviously, this line currently is not dirty because no one modified this data till now. The attacker is scheduled again. This time it writes 1, again using the non-cacheable alias. But again, the cache is completely bypassed. The attacker writes 1 directly into the memory, and the cache is completely bypassed. Neither the value and neither the dirty flag is updated. Then the attacker frees this part of memory, say, I don't want this memory anymore. So this link is removed, and now in theory it should be completely secure for the victim to use this memory location, right? So it reads from the virtual alias that is cacheable. It reads from the cache, so it reads 0. It checks the security policy. Let's say the security policy say to accept this request, D have to be 0. In this case, this is respected. So it accepts the request. And then, for some reason, this line from the cache gets evicted. We use something that collides with this cache line. But the line was not dirty, so nothing is written back to the memory. And now the victim uses again this address to fetch the value, but this time there is nothing in the cache. This is fetched from the memory, and we fetch 1. So this is a big issue, because the attacker managed to bypass the security policy. He managed to inject 1 into the secure functionality, bypassing completely the policy. So this is clearly an integrity threat. And it's based among this idea of transfer of memory ownership. So the attacker prepares something to the memory, and then transfer this memory to the victim. And the victim checks some policy, and then activates a secure functionality. There are several cases where the victim can possibly perform this kind of activity. But additionally to the integrity threat, this can even be a confidentiality threat. So that's the example. We have, again, an attacker and a victim. And we have a cache. And now the victim accesses 2 different cache lines. Can access the first cache line if this secret is 1, or it can access the second cache line if this secret is 0. So according to the secret, the victim can access one of the 2 cache lines. And actually, the cache is a shared resource. Both the attacker and the victim use the cache. They cannot directly render, but they can affect the same cache line. And the attacker uses mismeasured catchability attribute. He used 2 different virtual aliases pointing to the same physical address. In this case, they're not really sharing memory. They just share cache lines. So the attacker invalidates the cache just to be sure that there is nothing in the cache. It writes 0 into the non-cacheable alias, so we have 0 that is written directly into the memory. It reads using the cacheable alias, so it goes to the cache. 0 is fetched from the memory and is copied back to the cache. And then it writes 1 into the non-cacheable alias. So 1 bypasses the cache and is written directly to the memory. That's exactly what happened in the previous example, right? And now the attacker called the victim. So the victim is executed. Let's say the secret is 0. So we go to the other branch. We access the virtual alias V83. So we access this cache line. We read from the cache. The original value is not affected. Nothing is evicted here from the cache. We go back to the attacker. The attacker reads this line, again using the cacheable alias. It reads 0 from the cache. Let's try to do the same call. This time the secret is 1. So if the secret is 1, the victim accesses the first virtual alias. But actually, this virtual alias collide in the cache with the cache line that has been used by the attacker. So this forced this line to be evicted, but this is not dirty. So nothing is written back to the memory. The value for the victim is fetched from the cache. We activate back the attacker. The attacker reads again from the virtual alias that is cacheable, but it evicts what has been written by the victim. At this time, it fetches 1 from the memory. So it reads 1. So by just reading this virtual alias, the attacker is able to discover the secret, if the secret is 0 or 1. Basically, discover a cryptographic key, for example. So this is a confidentiality threat. And this can be used to build assets-driven attack. So attack where the victim accesses different line of the cache depending on secret values. There are several cases where cryptographic algorithm has been already been attacked using this kind of attack. But this time, usually people use timing to measure which cache line has been evicted. And timing is noisy, can be easily manipulated by the victim, introducing noise. In this case, we don't access any external variable. We just access the memory that is lot less noisy than timing or power consumption or similar. Okay? And this is the first time that someone built a side channel like this on a real CPU. So this is really difficult to countermeasure at runtime because the attacker don't have to ask to the victim to probe the current system time. So it's also difficult to detect this kind of attack. So is it really possible, this kind of attack? Let's see. So we took, I'm working on formally verifying an hypervisor. So I took my formally verified hypervisor and I tried to attack it. Okay? So this is an hypervisor that works similarly to Xen. It's a para-virtualizing hypervisor. So the idea is that we have an hypervisor here, and we have Linux on top of this. The hypervisor takes control of the page tables, and Linux has to ask the hypervisor to change them. That's how it works. Whenever Linux wants to spawn a new process, it prepares a new page table in memory, and then it asks the hypervisor, make this new page table read-only, and now validate this page table. Validate that what I've written there is sound. The hypervisor go there and check, is it true that there is no way using this page table to write to the other page tables or the hypervisor itself? If this is the case, we accept this request. Otherwise, no. So if this is the case, we activate the page table. Okay? But actually, between checking the content of the page table and activating it, we can have this value changing due to cache eviction. And Linux can able to inject something here malicious, basically being able to override the memory of the hypervisor itself. Basically, we managed to get complete control of the hypervisor. So bypassing completely the security policy of the hypervisor. So if you get Linux compromised, the hypervisor also gets compromised. Can we use this to extract cryptographic information? We try with Raspberry Pi 2. Because in Raspberry Pi 2, we can use trust zone. That is a special security domain in ARM. So we get a compromised Linux server here, and we get a secure service here. We deployed basically an AES encryption in trust zone. Okay? And in AES, there is a well-known vulnerability. So the last round of the encryption, the crypto, is the ciphertext, is computed by XORing the last round with the key, and the last round is basically an index that is used to access a public table, an S-box table. So this is a well-known vulnerability of AES, but until now has been only exploited using timing channel. So we replicate the attack basically to extract this key by measuring which cache line has been evicted here. And we didn't access any timing information or any power consumption here, by just watching what happened to this mismatched cacheability, what happened to the memory due to this mismatched cacheability attribute. So we managed to extract 128-bit key after around 850 encryptions. So some countermeasure to this attack. For the integrity threat, you need to guarantee that the memory is coherent. You should guarantee that if there is something in the cache, and that differs from what you have in the memory, what is in the cache is dirty. You have several possible countermeasures here. You either flush the cache whenever you enter in the critical application, or you selectively evict the line that are assessed by the critical software. For the confidentiality threat, you can use standard timing approach, right? Either you use secret independent memory access, so you guarantee that your software accesses always the same cache line, or you just disable the cache. If you have an encryption algorithm that uses S-box, just don't put the S-box in cacheable memory. There is also some vector-specific countermeasure. In particular, this happened because the hardware disregard unexpected cache hit. Just change the hardware. We contact ARM, and we ask for this behavior, and they say that possibly in the future, they will implement some CPU that does not have this behavior. So we also experiment with some other weird behavior of the hardware, some other like misbehavior. For example, where you have self-modifying code. And we managed to extract crypto key by using self-modifying code and discovering like secret if the victim have a control flow that depends on the secret. Okay, some concluding remarks. I mean, these storage channels are really bad, right? Because they invalidate the formal verification results. And so it's really important to counter them, and it's really important to check the assumption that you did in the formal verification and put the right countermeasure to prevent that these assumptions are not broken by some attacker. So someone can see this as a failure of formal verification. You spend a lot of money formally verifying a system, but this is still not secure. I see this more as a win. I mean, by formally verifying the system, we managed to identify the exact attacking surface, because this was basically identified by the assumption that we did to model the system. And we managed to spot this issue before that an attacker was able to use it. Okay, so we anticipate basically what an attacker can do. Some ongoing work, we are basically repairing the formal verification. We want technique that allows us to take this into account. And this is something that we are working on. There are a lot of other stuff in a CPU that can affect the behavior of a system, like TLB, branch prediction, and similar. So we are also investigating on all these other features of the CPU, how they can affect the formal verification. Yeah, thank you for your attention, and that's all.
Wow. Thank you. Very impressive presentation.
Yeah,
Took you
you
some time to put that together.
Yeah.
Are you teaching?
Yeah, I'm also teaching.
Okay,
yeah.
I could tell. Okay, thank you. So we could start on this end to see, we have this survey. Are you monitoring your ICS network traffic for security reasons? That is not, you don't...
No, I don't have a survey, yeah.
No, this is from, we asked the audience.
Okay.
So now we just want to know, what is your opinion? Should they? It seems like they don't.
I think you should.
They should, yeah. Some of them do, but yeah, you should probably need to change that figure a bit.
I mean, the network is an invisible attacker, right? Yeah. So if you don't monitor this, it's difficult to spot.
Okay, so even though they did monitor, they couldn't get it. So it would make no difference.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe that is not so well spent time then. Or? Let's see, we have a number of questions for you. Would the formally verified isolation be violated by Drammer or Rowhammer?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, you have a model, right? And you expect that writing something in the memory only affects this part of the memory. But if the CPU behaves in a different way, for example, using Rowhammer, this memory update can affect another memory location, and you didn't predict this, this can invalidate your result.
Are all of you familiar what Drammer Rowhammer is?
Okay, it works basically in this way. So usually you write in a physical location. Let's say you write in the location 1 megabyte, and you expect that only this byte change in memory, right? But due to physical error, I mean, to misbehavior of the hardware, it's possible by writing several times in a memory location, affect another memory location, bit flipping another memory location.
Okay.
So you write in the location 1 megabyte, and at some point suddenly the location 2 megabyte change. So if you didn't expect this during the formal verification, obviously your result can be invalidated. So you need to go back, change your assumption, and say, yeah, whenever you write into this memory location, we know that you can affect this other region of memory, and check if your system is still secure. So you need to refine this process.
Thank you. So you validated that attacks are possible. What is the potential impact? I mean, if you compare local, remote, or laboratory or real life.
Yeah, so I mean, here the assumption is that the attacker gets complete control of the operating system. So we just get root of Linux, basically. And there are existing attacks to obtain this. So we didn't care about how you can compromise Linux. But this is an assumption that you need to exploit this vulnerability, basically. And so if an attacker is able to get control remotely to your Linux system, and then, for example, you deployed your cryptographic operation in a complete isolated partition of your hardware, for example, using trust zone, then it is a problem, right? Because it can use this remote attack to get control of Linux, and then using Linux, it can tamper the secure service.
And what is the probability of that happening?
That someone compromised Linux, I have to say 100%, I think. I mean, on Android, it happens all the time, right?
Yeah. So it's a risk. ARM only. Are there any architecture specific or generic?
We experimented actually only with ARM. But the specification of Intel and PowerPC state exactly the same that ARM states. So we expect that the same attack can also work with Intel. But we didn't experiment actually with Intel.
Okay. I think that was about the number of questions you got.
Okay.
So we are a little bit early, but we will still thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will not keep you longer than necessary.
Okay.
Thank you for your contribution.
Yeah.
And good luck with your research.
Thank you.
So that means that